Ooh, that's tiny over there. All right, how do I make that? What? Good enough. All right. Let's see what we got. I think we're good. I think I'm streaming. Sorry about that. Got lost in their new interface, wasn't used to it. All right. So start off, and we'll do more introductions and welcomes, so don't worry too much about that at first, but just welcome. This is the first class for the Introduction to Programming course with JavaScript for Code the Dream. So yeah, let's get started right off the bat with just some introductions and icebreakers. I did a little bit of an introduction last time, but I can do that again. My name is Jared Sirla. I've been teaching with Code the Dream for a while now, volunteering with them to teach. I've taught Ruby and JavaScript, and I just enjoy helping other people learn how to program and trying to help them do it more effectively, especially people who feel like they're stuck or are challenged, to help them overcome that and break through that into something else. I've been programming professionally for over a decade now, and I've worked all the way from hardware stuff to just front-end web development. So I've done a little bit of just about everything across the spectrum of software development. So if you have any questions about what it's like in different areas, I've worked in a really large company where I was with IBM, and I've worked in what's now a relatively smaller company. So I can give you some perspectives on different companies, different cultures, different team structures, stuff like that as well. But I think what's more important is making sure that you guys get to know each other and that we're really engaged with each other in the class, because you're going to be, talking with each other. You're going to be bouncing ideas off of each other, trying to help each other solve problems. So I think what I would like to do is just, let's do an icebreaker where you get to know, we could go around the whole class, and we'll probably go around in just a minute and have us introduce people. But I like the idea where a lot of times you'll introduce somebody else. So find someone else and get their name, and maybe get, what else do we want? Why they were interested in Code the Dream. And because this is teaching with software development and programs, one of their favorite apps or programs that they use on their computer or phone. And once, let's spend a minute or so just getting to know each other a little bit, and then we'll go around the room and have everyone introduce somebody else to the class, if you don't mind. If anybody doesn't have someone, let me know. All right. I don't know if I can make a loud enough noise to get people's attention. Woo, there we go. Okay. Let's start up front, I guess, and go around the room and introduce the person. If you were in a group of 3 or something, you can split it up however you want, but introduce them to the class. Yes, to the whole class. So we'll just go around the room and get introductions, but you'll introduce the other person. Are you ready? All right, you guys want to start? Okay. Still a little loud, but.
Everyone, this is Connie. She is a stay-at-home mom of 2 children, and she used to work in finance. And in considering going back to work, she thought it would be a good idea to change into software development, and that's kind of what led her to Code the Dream. And we didn't even get to the apps, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's awesome.
We're perfect partners because Caroline is a mom too. And she's also in finance, and she just got into this area that she doesn't think that's right for her, and she's really interested in software development too. Yeah. This is Caroline.
Awesome. All right.
Okay, I would like to introduce, her name is Shu. She's a veteran. And she got involved with Code 3 because she wanted to build websites, or she's interested in web development. And her favorite app is Tires Puzzles.
Nice.
And my friend here is Mauricio, and he is from South America, grew up in New Jersey, and he is interested in the coding, so that he wants to build his own apps and didn't get to this.
All right. Awesome.
I'll go first.
All right.
This is Claudia. She previously worked with a little bit of programming and stuff like that when she was in high school, but she heard about Code the Dream from her husband, and she had heard about it from a couple of other people, and she was really interested in getting back into it and learning a lot of it more. So now she's
Awesome.
yeah.
And this is Kate. She's a student at PTC Software Development.
That.
Right. And she has a friend actually that's from her body. And she's like, hey, why not have one on myself? She's here. So this is Kate.
Yeah, I figured out about this place from Caitlin.
Oh, okay.
Caitlin,
Yeah. Yeah.
So she told me about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay, good evening. This lady right here, her name is Carletta Jones. She's actually the next person. I don't think she should be here, but. She already tests software. She wanted to get into this because she did learn JavaScript to learn to use automation tools.
All right.
She's doing already. That's as far as I got with her. So,
Cool.
That's why I'm taking them out.
And my friend here is Nick. He's a former Marine, and he's studying some coding, trucking paths. And he's actually, I think, also working with a few other languages like Swift.
Yes, Swift.
And very interested in learning more in coding.
All right.
That's what I had on email. I was in school last semester.
Okay.
Okay,
everybody out doing. This is Matt right here. He's just interested in helping others with the program. So, okay, save your app.
All of them.
Yeah. This is Bailey. Bailey's originally from High Point. Now a junior at NC Central, studying business administration, but has become increasingly interested in your program, so that's why he's here. He heard about the program from Carletta, who is the mother of his girlfriend.
Ah, nice.
My future son-in-law.
He's coming here with a little bit of experience as well, with C++, a little bit of Python, and just wants to learn and the rest of us make some money. Make some money. She doesn't have to pay that.
All right.
All right, my name is Erica. She works at UNC, and I forget everything else about it.
That's about it.
Awesome.
I have two people. First, this is Juan. Juan is here for the this is possible.
Okay.
All right, this is Marcus, and he's a network manager and management, and he basically wants to learn coding to everybody else. Yeah.
Right. Very cool.
This is Michelle. Michelle is a mom as well, and has been teaching herself how to code online. Which reminds me also like a couple of helpful online tutorials. So that's something that I found helpful. It's okay. And a place. So it's kind of a public place where there's sermons and teachings that she can go and find, learn, download.
Cool.
And this is Allison, she's our TA, and she loves to code, she loves to learn, and wants to improve their life. And she'd like to use Spotify.
This is someone who's pretty new to coding, and he's like better speaker.
All right.
This is John. He has experience in it. He's gone to the conversation. Yeah. And he just likes the environment. So that's why he's here.
Okay. Awesome.
This is Cliff. He's from Antito. Yeah, Antito, North Carolina. And here he does like some graphic design. So he came because he wanted to learn how to do application. So you can more and his favorite app is Solo.
This is Richard from California, heavily involved with church and all those things. He has some experience with graphics, with motion graphic animation. And he wanted to build on his skills to grow as an animator, web design, all sorts of development. Open to learning tons of new.
All right.
I get William, Durham, Jack, Ron, he works, programs, graphic design, the apps, Instagram, and I can be
So, this is Kevin. He's also a fellow Durhamite. He's a former stuntman, chef, speaks 30 languages. Nonprofits. He's here to learn some skills to help others with his nonprofit organizations. Possibly running a full stack development.
All right.
Hey everyone, this is Marquise, and Marquise is really impressive because he's only developing right now, and he has decided to basically push himself forward in the world of technology. And instead of focusing on computer games like the rest of this problem, he's decided to go beyond that and learn coding. I find it really inspiring. This is us. First year states learning for visual, graphic design, visual.
Awesome. I think we, yeah.
Oh, okay, so my name's, okay, so that's Oz. He like his favorite apps. I don't know, he likes to watch Netflix and Hulu stuff. And did you already do it? Okay. Okay, so and he learned about the dream through his learn.
That's ended up
Cool. And then I think maybe there were a couple people who didn't. Did you? Were you with someone either? Okay.
My name is Ashif. I actually participated in this class last year. I initially heard about Code Dream because I was doing an internship with IBM, and they kind of took me on. I was a network security major. I actually hated coding with my heart. And that internship really changed my perspective on it. And I figured I needed a lot more reinforcement. The person that brought me on was a fellow Tech student, and he took a chance on me because it was an internship where you strongly needed some kind of prior knowledge of coding, and I figured I would find meetups or some kind of local community to learn how to code, and I came across Dream. I applied, I spoke to Daisy, got on really well, and I'm here again now to reinforce my knowledge of JavaScript. My favorite app is Spotify, but I hate what they did with the UI.
Yeah. I don't use Spotify because I don't like their UI at all on the desktop. So I boycotted them.
How long were you at IBM?
My internship was from January to May last year.
And what about you?
Let me think. I can't remember exactly when I left. I was there, I came here around 2006. What? I don't. Maybe, I don't know. I was in their hardware division and I got sold to Lenovo. And then that was just, I'm not, I mean, Lenovo, a lot of great people were there, but it just wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something different, so.
And then came on right after that.
Okay. Yeah, I might. I will admit right now, this is confession time for me. I'm good. I know there's a couple more people I think who maybe we didn't get, or I don't know if you went, but confession time. I am epically bad with names. Epically bad. I will work to try and learn people's names. It will be hard for me. Anything you can do to help me out with that is going to be beneficial, and that includes if you don't have a picture on Slack with you, that would be useful too, because that's a good way for me to cheat and try and look up people's names when I'm forgetting it, because I'm much better with faces. So, yeah. Did you get an introduction?
I'm Jalen. I was actually in the just now previous Code the Dream batch, but I didn't grasp the information as quick as I wanted to. So I'm here again. I learned about Code the Dream from one of my instructors at Durham Tech. And I'm kind of surprised to see that there's a lot of Durham Tech connections here. Woo, DC. I'm a part of a lot of organizations there, so one of my instructors actually talked about this, and that's why I joined. I don't have a favorite app, but the app I'm on the most is Instagram.
All right. We miss anyone else? Everyone? Nice. All right, so let's do just some logistics, some basic logistics. We've already talked about this before. The schedule is 3 days a week. It's Thursdays and Saturdays on site, 7 to 9, and Saturdays is 10 to 12. Tuesdays is remote. You can roughly think of it as 7 to 9, although any videos that I record, if they're pre-recorded, will definitely not be a 2-hour video. But the goal is to try and set aside that block of time so that you will have time to work on any assignments or anything else. If I did pre-record a video, I will try to make it a goal to be on Slack actively during that time. So if people are working through problems and asking questions, I will be responding very promptly. I can't guarantee that during, say, regular work hours, although I encourage people to ask questions anyways, because you might get answers from your peers, or you might get answers from the other TAs, or you might just get an answer from me if, you know, I've got a little downtime and I have a chance to look at it. But if we're doing live on Tuesdays, it also probably won't be a full 2 hours of just a live remote lecture. But hopefully there'll be some time for questions and working through some problems. The tools, mostly what we're going to be using for communication is Slack. So expect pretty much all of your communication to come through that. The main channel is the JavaScript 2019 channel. Cloud9, everyone should have an account set up on that. If you didn't get an account set up on that yet, then we'll either try and work through that tonight with you or post something on Slack just in the channel, and we'll try and help get you set up so that you have Cloud9 set up. And then you don't need this today, but I plan on using this site called repl.it, and I'll help get that information out so people can get set up and part of the class or assignment that I have on there. And that's a place where people can work through predefined coding assignments where it'll have some automated tests to run against it to make sure that it meets what the goal is. And it's also a really easy place for me to be able to give you feedback if there's something wrong. It's a lot, I like it. I think I'm the only instructor that uses it, but I find it's a lot easier to give feedback, especially on these more contained, more basic coding things than it is if I have to remote into your Cloud9 environment and get on there to try and figure out what's going on. So that's another site that we'll be using. You can check it out right now if you want. It literally is repl.it, but we'll be using that. And there's also a lot of other assignments or other problem sets on there. So if you want to push yourself and you want to go ahead and work through other problems, you'll be able to find them. And that includes in other languages as well if you want. All right, for the instruction, the teaching style, this is going to be split up between teaching new topics, group work where you'll be working on something collectively, working through examples and exercises. I haven't yet got all the tooling in place for what I want, but there's also a common or a newer teaching pattern, which is known as like peer instruction, that I want to try and adopt, assuming I can get some tooling in place that'll work for that, with active quizzes with everyone, where there'll be essentially some sample of code up there. Everyone will have a chance to submit an answer, but we won't talk about the individual answers at all. Then we'll split up into groups, talk among the group about what you think the right answer is, and then submit answers again. And the goal there is to try and sort of learn collectively and learn from each other about how to improve. Assignments should be based on the concepts covered in class, but they'll stretch you in different ways. Sometimes they'll be quite a challenge. A lot of times they'll be pretty basic. I'll try and set different levels of them where there's some simple ones, some that get more difficult, and some that might be really hard to accomplish. I would say the top things to take away to have this be successful is stay engaged in class, stay engaged online. The more that you're doing that, the more successful you'll be. It sounds like we've got a broad range of experience here too. So one thing, I've got help each other down here and talk with each other. We've got some people who have worked in other programming languages. They've got some experience with some of this stuff. There'll be times where some of the material we're going over, especially early on, is going to be too slow for somebody who has experience. They're going to feel maybe a little bored, but that's a great opportunity for them to help out other people if there's questions, to be able to work together that way. So I really encourage people to do that. And on that ask questions, you guys don't have to, but I'm sort of going to put the TAs on the spot if they want to as well. I already had a question about how long I was at IBM. I want to give people just a few minutes. We can set a timer if we want again, maybe a 5-minute timer or something. And if people want to ask any questions to me, or if the TAs are also willing to have questions asked of them, if you have any questions for them, then we'll just take some time. And I'm going to do 10 just in case, and if we don't use it all, that's fine. But I don't want people to feel rushed. So if you have any questions about, my programming experience, personal preferences, what's my favorite app? I don't know. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I use an app called Pocket Casts. That's probably one that gets more use than just about anything else. So there's an answer to a question. Yeah. What podcasts do I listen to? I listen to a lot of software development podcasts. I also listen to different nerdy podcasts in various nerd veins. So let me take a look at some of the stuff I have on here. I listen to one that hasn't had an episode in a long time, but if anybody's into really long podcasts, basically books, and one's deep history, there's a guy called Dan Carlin who does some amazing, he does one called Common Sense. It's sort of on modern politics, but he hasn't done one in a while because he's very jaded. But he also does a podcast called Hardcore History. And he did, for example, I think it was a 4-part series on World War I called Blueprint for Armageddon. That thing, each episode is like 3+ hours long. So it's deep. Listen to Freakonomics Radio. I listen to ones, I play a game called Magic the Gathering as a hobby, and so I listen to Magic podcasts. Let me see what else I have. I've got one that I've been listening to lately a little bit called Hello from the Magic Tavern, which is, the whole plot of that is somebody fell through a hole behind a local fast food joint into another world, like a magic world, and he has just enough Wi-Fi signal to send a podcast out. That's the gist of that, and then he's interviewing crazy people, and yeah. Other questions? Yes.
What's one app you found very impressive?
Technically impressive. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I love about different apps. Let me even look. I don't know. I mean, I don't think about. Yeah.
And understanding how stuff, it's impressive. That's really, I mean, you can pay for that, but it's good stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love really weird games. So games that stretch your mind. So for example, one that I played was called Monument Valley. That's all about manipulating stuff in different ways. That's a fun one. And then I think another one that's weird to say, it impressed me, but just the first time I played around with Google Cardboard and the idea of the virtual reality done so cheaply, that was really impressive to me. Do I play what? I don't play a lot of video games anymore. I used to play a ton of video games when I was younger. I sort of got bored of them for a while and didn't play any for a long time. I've been playing some stuff lately, but it's mostly been stuff like on my Switch. So, yeah. That's stuff that I find impressive. Nintendo's done a lot of really cool stuff with their hardware. So, other questions? Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, let's ask something easy. You guys want to answer this? Somebody want to try?
What are you specifically wondering?
I don't know, whatever you want.
I think a lot of things that they call artificial intelligence these days is BS. Like, it's really not all that smart. And it's a lot of things that just involve like categorizing things statistically, recognizing patterns, and it's not what you would think of as like a robot that kind of like acts like a human. So a lot of it is not terribly impressive. Although the stuff that like Google does with the AI that they developed to play like Go and things like that, that's super cool. And I think we're just like in the very sort of like very early stages of AI. And while the stuff that's coming out right now is not that amazing, I think within like 10 to 20 years, like stuff that'll just
How do you define
Nice, easy questions. You'll find. I'll give an answer to the first one. I'm a little bit of a pessimist. I mean, I think that it does some really cool stuff, what we have right now, but we've gone through other hype phases in the computer science industry where they've thought, oh, we've got artificial intelligence. This is amazing. We've solved all the problems. It's going to surpass us. And then it hit a wall and wasn't able to do much more than that. I think that's probably going to be the case with what we have right now. My pessimism is we're not going to get self-driving cars out of the current wave. We have to have more innovation. And also, to build off of the statement of like a lot of what we call artificial intelligence, there's a lot of stuff that's artificial intelligence that's really feeding off of a lot of human information. And so it's more a way of saying, oh, we've done a whole bunch of work to figure out how to do something, and now we're just putting that in a computer and it's able to help us out. So it wouldn't be able to be used to do something novel, right? Like there's a lot of things where they can detect cancers, and that's because we've looked at scans thousands and thousands of times and figured out what that looks like, and we're able to put that into the computer. If we had a new problem, we're like, oh, figure out the pattern that fits this, without us having already done a whole bunch of intelligent work to figure out what those patterns are and tell the computer, it wouldn't be able to figure that out.
I did advise in graduate school that called computers fast feed. They're basically like, they're very stupid. It's like exactly what Jared was talking about. In programming, you have to tell the computer exactly what you want to do. Mess up like one character in a line of code, it won't work. And so computers are basically just very fast at processing all the data. So like all this AI stuff is just like feed in, like a human doctor has gone through and looked at images like X-rays, and they see like the X-ray shows a broken bone or a cancer or something. They have to like tag it, or like Google's photo recognition, like people have tagged photos of cats and dogs. So the AI is really just like a bunch of different like data processing. There's other kinds, so that's like the basic level of AI that's where we are right now. There's like way more advanced versions of AI that would be like way beyond what we know right now.
That's good. Yes.
Just two things. First, the comment about self-driving cars. I think with 5G, it's a possibility if we get put enough 5G towers around. Number two, I think the upcoming coders, what do you think we should take away from, I guess, a famous app that was like 2 billion code that's Flappy Bird? What do you think are some key points that we should take away looking at that and to be able to understand how we can use that to incorporate some art coding as new developers?
It's an interesting question. You mean, what do you take away from like an existing app about how you should code?
Well, I mean, such as Flappy Bird, like it was a popular application, but I heard that it was like only 2 pages of code, but it was so successful. Then I guess for us as a new standpoint, I guess not really knowing how to code somewhat, someone's really knowing how to code. What kind of takeaways do you take away the mindset of success through such a simple application through coding to be able to try to incorporate it, that we can use it and it's very hard for you.
Yeah, I've got, my plan is to present a lot of quotes scattered throughout the class that hopefully help you out with those things. But that, I mean, it's a little trite, but you know, it was a popular app. It didn't take a lot of work. So a couple lessons from that are keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. And one that you're not going to be able to apply right away, because we're going to teach you, you know, the basics of code at first, is use other people's tools. Like, the reason it was able to have so few lines of code is not because he wrote everything from scratch, but because he leveraged existing solutions to these problems or existing libraries that did things and just had to write a little bit around it. All right. Does anybody have any other pressing questions right now? You have plenty more time for that. I just wanted to, that may seem a little silly, but I wanted to make sure that people felt like they could just interact, just ask questions about just about anything during this class, because that's one of the ways you're going to get the most out of it, and it's going to be the most useful to you. There'll be times where I'm moving too fast for you, or you got lost on something, or I just didn't communicate something very clearly. If you have a question about it, ask it. Doesn't mean that we'll always be able to stop and, pardon me, rewind and cover that material again, but I will definitely try to do that whenever I can. This is this is actually from a book. It's a very short book called The Dip by a guy called Seth Godin. And I put this up here because this is sort of like a perpetual cycle when you're doing software development. This isn't a one-time thing. This is going to happen to you over and over and over again, where you're going to start on software development. You're going to be like, all right, I've got this stuff down. You know, I'm figuring out what's going on. And then you're going to crash into this pit where you're like, oh my gosh, nothing works. I can't solve it. I can't, this is too complex. This is beyond my capabilities. And so just expect that is essentially what I'm saying. Don't get discouraged when that happens, when you thought you had everything figured out and then suddenly nothing's working again, or you feel like this has gone beyond my capabilities. That's a cycle you're always going through. I go through it every day, where I'm having to pick up a new bit of technology and I look at this thing and I've been coding for ages and I'm like, I have no idea how this works. What is this magic that this guy's doing? And then, you know, a couple days later, or an hour later, or a week later, I'm like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. It made my life easy. I really love using it. So it's something that you'll have to get used to. Unfortunately, there's really no shortcut to learning how to transform your thoughts into code. What I talked about quickly last time was that there are, and talk about it more, but there are two main aspects to programming. We're not going to get into the syntax very much today, but syntax is how you, the words of a programming language, right? We all speak at least one language. Who speaks more than one language here? It's a good group of people, right? The rules for each language are different, right? Like some languages have gendered nouns or whatever, like everything has to have a gender there, right? The ordering of the parts of language are different in different languages, right? And so it can be a challenge when you're having to speak more than one language to remember, oh yeah, this is the way that stuff is structured in this language. This is the correct way to phrase things. That's the same case for programming languages. Each programming language is just like a spoken language. Each one has a different way that stuff is put together, that stuff is constructed, a different way of ordering things. Now, for the most part, just like most spoken languages, there's patterns that are very similar. So they're not completely different. They're related, but they're not exactly the same. So the challenge when you're first learning how to code is you're going to get stuck on that stuff all the time. You're going to get stuck on these syntax elements, and it's going to be very frustrating. The other aspect of code, at first, especially with the types of problems that you're going to encounter when you're first learning how to code, is going to seem like trivial. And that'll be the semantics, the what does this code mean? What am I trying to say in it? That part's going to be easy at first because the problems will be simple. But what you'll find is after you've programmed a good amount in any language, the challenge for the most part flips eventually, where the syntax is the relatively easy part because you've done that enough. And so imagine, you know, writing poetry, right? Like poetry is a complex thing to write. And it's not necessarily complex because writing something in the language and just expressing it in the language is complex. Sure, there's bits of that, but the hard part is trying to express your ideas. And so over time, that'll be the challenge that you'll encounter with code, but you're gonna have to deal with both aspects of it. And it's just gonna take time and practice to sort of get this through. The more time you spend on it, the more you do repetitive things at first, the easier it's going to be later when you get into a lot more of these real challenging aspects. So the only real hands-on bit that we're going to be doing today, and I know it's sort of a recap, is just going into some more of this conversation about a terminal and how it works. We're not going to get too much into code, although we're going to have an assignment or something that will work at the end that'll be related to that. But I wanted to really get people comfortable in the terminal. I know some people are probably already pretty comfortable there. Other people, they'll get really intimidated by this, and it's one of the big stumbling blocks when they're first learning software development. And it's just, I wouldn't say every environment uses a terminal. Like if you're only programming on Windows with C#, you may never have to encounter this. But most programming languages, this is a common environment for you to have to work in. The easiest way to think about it is it's just another way of seeing your computer. You're used to seeing, you know, this graphical user interface with windows and like a Finder or your Explorer. A terminal is just another way to look at the information on your computer. It just doesn't have all these graphics around it. So we'll sort of talk about some basic things that you'll need to know, and then also talk about how to maybe learn more stuff on your own as well. So I would say the three, there's more, but the three most basic commands you're going to run in the terminal are ls, which just lists directory contents, cd, which changes the directory that you're in, and pwd, which isn't really probably the most common one, but you'll do it a lot because you'll get lost, which is print working directory. It's really sort of a way of saying, if you imagine, you know, you're looking at one of those maps on a wall somewhere and it says you are here. That's what pwd is telling you. You are here. All right, so I'm going to pull up a terminal, and I'm just going to use this one at first. Now, you know what? Let me see if I can use the same one that you guys would be using right now. So if you guys are in Cloud9, you can log in and see your terminals. Let me see if I can get this to do correctly. It won't work from there because Cloud9 changes the way stuff works. All right, we'll make it really large. I don't want to see my workspace area, so I'll close it. And now we've got a terminal that should look very similar to what you guys have on Cloud9. I may switch over to the one on my desktop in a minute just to show you some more complex things because I don't have much in this Cloud9 environment. But the first thing you would do, and a lot of times, is just list what's here, right? So I happen to have, I've got this readme.md file. I have a file called foods.txt, and I have hello.js. Really simple. And that's what's in what's essentially my home directory here. But I can also move around. So the CD lets me change directories. So I'm going to make another directory real fast. You don't have to know every one of these commands I'm going to type here right now, but I'm going to do it live so that you can see them and hopefully sort of learn some of this as well. I'm going to make a temp directory. So now if I type ls, we can see that I've got the readme and I also have a temp directory there. And I can move into that directory by typing cd temp. And it moves into that directory. It's basically saying change into this other directory. And now if I type ls here, there's nothing because I don't have anything in this directory. So maybe I'll create a file here. We'll put something into a file. What will I call it? We'll call it podcasts, right? Some of these commands, again, you don't have to necessarily learn all of these. I'm just taking some extra steps to show you some of this. And then I'm going to go ahead and now I've got a file there, but this isn't where I want to be. I want to run my hello world that we created last time. So if you change directory, a dot dot is a way of saying go down one level. So when I said dot dot, and now if I type ls to see what's there, I see the files that were at that level I wanted to be at. And now I can run my JavaScript program again that we have, and it prints out hello world. Let me bring this stuff back to the top so that it's not way down at the bottom. And you can feel free to play around a fair bit, because now I'll show, if you do pwd, what's my working directory, you see I'm in this home Ubuntu workspace. So maybe I want to go farther down. I'm going to go down a couple directories, and I just dot dot is essentially like saying down. So if I do dot dot slash, I moved down 2 directories. And so now if I type pwd, it says home instead of Ubuntu workspace because I moved down through both of those. And if I look, I don't have much in there, just this Ubuntu. Not much going on. Now maybe there's some hidden files though, so if I do like ls space -a, it'll show me. And look at that, that dot dot, it's right there. It actually shows up as a folder when you're looking at everything. So you can sort of see like, oh, there's a dot dot folder. So cd dot dot is essentially just moving into that dot dot folder. It just so happens that the dot dot folder is actually a reference to say, oh, go down a level. And now if I go down here, which is essentially the root of the computer, I've got a whole bunch of folders and other things going on, right? This is just the same as if I was on a Mac, you know, I'm in my Finder, and I'm just sort of navigating around to different levels of my computer. That's really the same thing I'm doing here. I'm just happen to be doing it at a terminal or at a command line. All right, well now I want to get back to my folder. There's a little shortcut to go home, which is this tilde that's in the upper left corner of your keyboard. And that will send you home. But you notice that's still not the same as my workspace. So now I'm going to go into my workspace again. And there I am. All my files are back to what I wanted. So that's just really simple stuff. And you should just, you know, play around with that, navigate around on your computer, and get comfortable moving around to different places using that. Here I am on my actual like Mac, which has a lot more going on in it. I've got a lot more files. You'll notice all of these dot files that are hidden normally got listed with my ls on here. That's because I've just changed what ls does. I've remapped it to do something a little different. But I can still do the same thing. I can move up and down my directories. And now if I look at where I'm at, let me move this to the top. I'm at the root of my computer, but if I want to go back to my home directory, I can do the little squiggly, move back here. All relatively simple for that stuff. Are there any questions about just the basic navigation with that in the terminal? Yeah? Yeah, you could, yes. Because I navigated down and you'll notice that from right here, if I type like cd temp, which is a folder there, I could move into the temp folder. But if you put a slash, that's essentially saying the root of your drive. So if I wanted to, like, let me look at my present working directory right now. I'm home Ubuntu workspace. So if I cd/home, that was the same. I'm moved all the way down to that folder, but instead what I did was I said, "Ooh, I'm going to go into the directory starting from the root of my drive, home." And so that's a different way to navigate, like home Ubuntu, and now I'm in that folder, right? So yeah, there's a ton of different ways to navigate around with this stuff. Yeah.
Why will we use these?
I mean, the best answer I have is nobody has to do this. So there's a lot of Windows developers I know who use GUIs very consistently, but enough people and enough tutorials and enough things use the terminal that it's a very useful tool to be familiar with. So knowing at least the basics of how to get around is, I think, very important, because otherwise you can easily have a set of resources that you wouldn't be able to use. And there are some programs that only run on the command line or a terminal. There are some that just don't work somewhere else, and sometimes they're really powerful programs. And so it's useful to be able to leverage those and leverage some of that stuff. It's also important because this, like, if you look at the path here, when you're doing things like reading files or writing files, you're using a lot of this same path structure and other things. So having a familiarity with how it's represented in the terminal and how to navigate that stuff will translate into what you end up putting into code a lot of times when you're working with things. Yeah.
I will say that I hate the command line. 100%. I can't stand it. I don't like doing it. It's like a necessary evil to me. I try to avoid using it at all possible, so I absolutely have to. I never remember any of the commands, and anytime I need to, I just go and look them up because I can't remember. I mean, there's a lot of like abbreviations and things that, unless you're doing it all the time, you won't remember. So it's okay. So like, this will be frustrating at first. You'll hate it, but welcome to the world of programming. It's sort of like, for some reason, I think a lot of professions do this, where they keep things really like obscure, so other people can't come on and do them. Like doctors, for example, like all these tests to take from a doctor, right? So it's like, this is like a hurdle if they're going to become a programmer. And I think it's like, I don't think it's intentional, but it's like one of these things that's like sort of legacy in the way that this is how people first interacted with computers when they became popular. And it just has sort of like carried over through time. And for some reason, programmers really like to do this. In my opinion, it's a terrible way to interact.
I think that's great, right? Yeah, I've got some peers at work who pretty much never go into the command line, never use it. They're on a Windows system. But then sometimes, there's been times where it's been like, hey, can you just help me solve this problem over here? And there's times where I go, I have no idea what I'm doing in this GUI that you have. I don't know how to solve my problem. You need to come over here and fix this for me because I'm lost, right? Yes?
I would say, given web development in general, even in a professional environment, knowing command line is very important, because more than likely some form of version control, and knowing command line is very integral, because more than likely using Git and GitHub to push your code to your repository, and if you're merging and stuff with other people's code, it's just better to know those things. Usually in Git, if you're working in command line, there's from your computer. So if you want to look at it in a way, learning a basic command line is like learning how to crawl before learning how to walk.
But there is a GitHub GUI now. So don't.
There are some really good Git GUIs. Yes, there are. SourceTree has one, or SourceTree is the name of Atlassian's, and yeah, there's some really good Git.
But yeah, don't let it make you crazy. Like, you definitely have to know this stuff. You don't like it. It's just something you have to know, unfortunately.
Not to be that course, we can
just makes me feel like, that's it. I mean, I just like hack away, but also it's faster to create files, to get to somewhere. It's just faster. That's it. So it isn't have a habit, and I think it is. It's definitely a little bit of a status thing. It is really helpful. It's a good kind of personal.
I will agree with you. There are things that like interacting with command line way faster to do than it is to just like they have GUIs for this.
So, I mean, I can't say that everything has a GUI, but there's definitely GUIs to do a lot of things. But yeah, like the basic stuff that we'll probably be doing in this class, for example, you know, you already saw me do that a little bit where we run the hello, right? And what we run is node hello.js. And so we're doing that from the command line. That's just the easiest way to do that. There's probably we could probably have some sort of GUI layer where you can just double click it and it knows to run node or something else. But yeah, one of the other reasons that we end up teaching the command line in this class is GUI programming without using a framework that already does all of the complex things for you and is sort of hiding it is much harder to build and do. So a lot of we're trying to, I guess, just sort of focus on the basics of the code, at least at first. And so it's much easier to spit something out to the command line than it is to render something in a GUI for the most part. You'll see some examples of how we can work around some of that soon, but it's a lot easier to work with stuff that way. It's also usually easier to get input from a command line or stuff along those lines when you're just sort of learning. All right, so building on what we have here, how do I know what these programs can do? Like, you're on a command line. How do I know what this does? Like, maybe in Chrome, I can go look at my help or something. You know, in most programs, I can come up here and look at help in some way. How do I know or learn about a program in the command line? The most common way to do it is another program on the command line called man, which stands short for manual, and then the command or the program that you're trying to learn about. So in this case, you know, if we want to understand a little bit more about this list directory program, we can type man ls, and we bring up essentially documentation on this program that'll help tell us how it works and what it does. So if you want to give that a shot on your system, if you're in Cloud 9, you can just type man ls. It'll bring up the manual page for the ls program. And I'm telling you right now, it's another program, right? It doesn't just print it to your terminal. So you need to just hit Q, and that will exit out of the manual page back to the standard terminal. So don't get stuck there. If you have it open, just hit Q. But let's just get a little bit of practice sort of looking some stuff up in the manual pages. So anybody wants to tell me what the -L parameter for the ls program does? Look at that up in the manual page for ls, and you should be able to find it documented in there somewhere. And you can work together if you want. Doesn't matter. When somebody finds the answer, if you want to, you can put your hand up or. Yes? Yeah, sure. Use long listing. There we go. So what does that mean? I don't know. Let's check. Let's test it, right? ls space -l. That's how you send parameters to it. And if we just did ls, you can see it's very different. We have a row for every file here or folder with a lot more information about it. It includes a date. I think that's when it was last modified. It includes, this is the size of the file. information about, this is detailed information about who has permissions to do different things on the file. Like R stands for read, W stands for write. So, you know, if you're familiar with how this reads, you can understand who has different permissions on the file, etc. You know, I don't know what that stuff means off the top of my head, but if you're, you know, very comfortable with this, then you'd be able to read that and say, oh yeah, this program has read-write permissions. This program has those. So let's, a couple more of these. Let's keep trying this out. What is the description of the less program? Somebody else want to look this one up and tell me? Yeah. Somebody's got it. Yeah. There we go.
I think basically what you're showing, if you're reading from, you can print it, and like same with like failing head, sorry.
No, you're good.
But you can like get less information, like condensed version of what you're trying to figure out, and you can expand it with more.
This is a little bit of a tricky one. Its manual page is a pun about where its name came from. And really it's just a way, if you're working on the command line, how do you look at the contents of a file? How do we look at the contents of, say, hello.js? Or let's look at this foods.txt, right? There's several ways to do it. One is cat, and what that's going to do is just literally print out the contents of that file right there. But if we type less foods.txt, it actually opened it in this less program and lets us view that file and the contents of it.
I always forgot how to read files, and like I didn't know that in my head. I was just like, open.
Yeah.
Open. But it's not how it works.
Oh yeah. Well, different platforms have used different terms too, right? So yeah. Can I write in the file with less? No, less is just for reading. So let's look at another one, like the README. Is it capital? Let me see here. There we go. This file's, wished it was longer. Let me find one that's longer. I'm gonna move down somewhere until I find a longer file. Oh man, let me see here. I'm gonna regret this. Oh, I don't have anything there. All right, let's just go back to the root. Let me try and find a longer file here. Etc. We should have some stuff in there, right? All right, let's look at this. It's a really tiny file too. One of these has to be large. Let's look at legal. What does this say? Oh, it's tiny too. Everything's so small. Bash.bashrc. All right, this is a longer file. So what less will do, one of the things it will do for you, which is nice, is unlike cat, which just prints out everything from the file. So I'm going to step back out of this and do cat on this. Might regret this because it just spit it all out here, and now I have to scroll up and down to find it. Less automatically paginates. So if you hit, now you have to know how it works, but it's pretty simple, which is like the space bar will let you go down. You can use your arrow keys as well, but space bar is a page at a time. And so it lets you view this file in this other program. And then much like the man page, you can hit Q to exit. All right, so let's do one more here. I always love having people look up less because its description is so awful, the opposite of more. The reason it says that, by the way, is there was a program that did the same thing as less, which let you look at the contents of a file that was called more, and they wanted to have a different one that did stuff in a different way, and so they just called it less. It's a bad old joke. So what is the description of the node program? Ooh, I might have one more after this, actually. What's that? We have it? Yeah. Great. Yep. So that, I mean, I think that's a good explanation, right? We're going to be writing JavaScript. We want to run it outside of a browser for the purpose of this class. Node is the perfect tool for us to accomplish that. And you can see that description right there at the man page for it. And not every single command is going to have a man page. So if you tried like man cd, you'll see that it tells you it doesn't have one. And that's because that's actually just built into the program that is the terminal. So you don't, but most of them are going to have a man page. Most of the basic command line ones. So you saw me like create a file earlier by using one called touch, right? And so we could look up that. It really just says change file timestamps, but it can also be used to create a file. Exactly. Oh, I didn't change that. I was going to say what is the description of the man program, but and this ran well off the page. Sorry about that. So one last bit, going into some more detail on working on the command line is some really useful tips and tricks if you're living on the command line. One of the first one is if you use the arrow up key, you can get the last command that you typed. So if, for example, you typed ls-l to list everything, if you just hit arrow up, there's the last command you typed. And if you keep hitting arrow up, it'll keep going through each command that you typed as deep as your history is for your shell, which is probably like 1,000 commands, maybe 10,000. It's going to be large enough that you're not going to remember where you are. But yeah, you can just easily go back through. That's a useful thing to do because a lot of times if you're at the command line, you're going to be typing the same thing over and over, or you're going to type one thing, then type another command, and then need to type that first one again real fast. So it's useful so you don't always have to type it. You can just sort of hit the up arrow key. Next is if it gets real cluttered, you've got a lot that is on there, you can clear the terminal using, it's actually Command K on here, isn't it? Or the clear program. So clear is an actual program. But yeah, if you have a lot of stuff on here, like I'm just gonna fill my screen up. Then if I type clear, it clears my screen. Or again, if I did the same thing, filled it up with some stuff and I hit Command K on here, it clears it as well. I think Control L also does. So it can vary a little bit, but. And then another one that's really useful and takes a little bit of practice to get into your head, but this will save you a lot of time and a lot of typos where you think that you're typing something, you're like, why isn't it running? Why isn't this working? Is tab completion. Your pretty much every terminal, not all of them, but most of them have tab completion built in. And it's a really nice thing that will help you. If it can figure out what you're trying to type, essentially, when you hit tab, it'll try and just fill in those characters for you, just type them for you. So if you were, for example, people should have the hello.js file. If you wanted to look at it on the command line, you could type cat and then start typing hello, like HE. And if you hit tab, if you don't have another file in that folder that can match that name, it'll just finish the rest of that for you and fill it in.
The same as the new Gmail.
Gmail has tab completion? Nice.
With AI. That's because they steal everybody's.
So yeah, tab completion is your friend. I really recommend just hit tab all the time, even if you're not sure, right? So like if I make another file here, right? And now, you know, I'm gonna like, if I hit tab, this will vary depending on the platform you're on. On Windows, it'll actually cycle through the things that could match it. On most Linux platforms, what it'll do is it won't complete it. So if I'm hitting tab right now, you're not seeing it fill it in. But if I hit it a second time, it'll show you the possible matches. And it will fill it out as far as it could. So for example, since both of these have that, if I hit it, you'll see that it goes added 2 L's because it knows, oh, any possible match has at least this much in common. And then here are the other ones. I can just type O, hit tab again, and it's like, oh, I know what you wanted to hit now. So I really recommend getting used to that because otherwise you'll get frustrated when you're having to type in your programming assignment 4-1, .js, and you mistype assignment with 1A or whatever, and you have tab completion. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Any questions about the shortcuts? All right, so let's talk. Again, this class is very much introductory. Next class, we're going to be diving into the fundamentals of JavaScript and really more fundamentals of programming languages. But let's just talk about code and programming outside of that context first. So what is code? Does anybody want to give me a description of what code is? Take a stab at it. Syntax. A set of instructions. Anyone else? Set of instructions using syntax. Sure. I mean, you could define it in a lot of different ways, but a set of instructions, exactly, to tell the computer what tasks to perform, right? We'll talk a little bit more about how computers actually work in some of the other classes, but they don't actually understand the level of code that we write. They understand something much more low level, and we don't write at that level because it would be a nightmare. But that's really all code is. Any code is just a set of instructions to tell the computer what tasks to perform. So then, if that's what code is, what is programming? Sounds good. Yeah. Any other descriptions? Yeah. Yeah. I like it. I like it. Anything else?
Set of instructions to different objects and they behave in a certain way.
All right. Anyone else? You think? All right. What I have is really not much more than the set of instructions. It's the process of writing down a set of instructions to perform a specific task, right? So you've got something that you want to accomplish, and you've got instructions that you can tell it. So programming is just the process of writing those instructions down to get that task done, right? A computer knows a specific way to do that, and we know it, how to do it differently. So let's practice this. You're like, wait a minute, we don't know how to write any code yet. We haven't looked at any syntax or how stuff works. Yeah, we're not going to actually write code. We're just going to practice being very precise as you can think about, with putting down a set of instructions to perform a task. So we can split up into groups if you want. I've got 2 of these that we're going to work on, and I'm going to do my darndest to make sure that your instructions are not specific enough for me to solve the problem. So in your group, try to think like, how specific do we have to be to get this problem solved correctly, or is he going to be able to mess this up? I am going to do that after. I'm going to give people some time in a group, and then you know, if one group's like, hey, let's, you know, probably won't get to do every group, but we'll have like 1 or 2 groups try and give me the instructions to draw a square on the whiteboard based off of what they came up with. So let's have that be the first thing. So if you want to split up into groups, how much time do you guys think you want for this?
10 minutes.
5 minutes, 10 minutes? What? 5 minutes. We're going to do 5 minutes. Put some pressure on you. All right, so 5 minutes, split up into groups, however large you want them to be. Just find some people to group with. And then in 5 minutes, I'll pull a couple groups and we'll try and follow those instructions to have me draw a square on the whiteboard. However many you want. Oh, I see. Yeah, let's assume I'll be over at the board. I'll give you that. Uh-oh. All right, all right. What group has some instructions for me? Who's got some? You ready? Oh, we're ready? All right. What do we got? Oh, we forgot to have you take the cap off. Yeah. What's that? Okay. Vertical line south. Oh, okay. I didn't know how to draw in the air, like south.
And then stop there. And then draw straight line to the left, stop. And then
Okay, I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad. Does anybody have something different? There's ways I'm going to screw this up, right? Like you told me start at any point, and since you had to go down, I could have started here, and we had a problem. Or if I had started here, we would have had some issues, right? All right. Somebody else have a different set of, you guys? Yeah.
okay, so pick up the marker in your dominant hand.
Oh, good.
Take the cap off with your other hand. Okay, place the cap down.
You notice he's actually left-handed.
I'm left-handed.
I'm sort of either-handed, but yes, I am left-handed.
Place
You should have to be writing with your right.
right hand. I assume.
Okay, I'm gonna do it with the right hand.
No. I said follow the instructions.
I know.
Okay, so this cap down, and then place the marker tip on the whiteboard in the center of the whiteboard.
Ah, there we go.
Parallel to the left side of the board, move the marker 5 inches down.
Like it.
Parallel to the bottom side of the board, move the marker 5 inches right. Parallel to the right side of the board, the marker 5 inches up. Parallel to the top of the board, move the marker 5 inches up.
Okay. All right. Did anybody have stuff that they realized they were missing as we started going through these? Yeah?
I feel like we have to define the size of the whiteboard first.
Yeah.
And based on that, size of the square and the space around the square.
In programming, you're right, for the most part. Like, I might, if I remember, and of course I won't, I might throw together like a really quick example of a program that could do this, or something very similar to this. in a web browser in what's known as a canvas. And you'll see that the steps are pretty similar to that, but you're right, one of the very first things I would have to do, although I could do it technically probably outside of my JavaScript, is create my canvas, like what I'm going to draw on. So yeah, it's a good point. Anything else? Something somebody missed? Anybody forget to have me take the cap off the marker? Yeah? Right? Oh, it didn't even pick up the marker. Yeah. Oh, it's a tough one. Anything else that somebody realized they missed?
What direction? Because I just wrote down like make a vertical line in the first one. Go this way.
Right. Yep. All good. So I think what you'll get, right, is if you were telling a person that, it's easy. You know, go draw a square, I don't know, about a foot large on the whiteboard, right? And they're going to take what you said and interpret a bunch of stuff about it. They may even come back and ask questions for clarification if they're not sure. Do you care what color I draw it? Like, no, I don't care. Just use whatever marker, right? But in software, unfortunately, the computer isn't smart enough to interpret vague statements. It's not smart enough to figure out what you're trying to say, you know, unless it's got some really great AI going on. So in that case, you have to be very specific telling it what you want to do, or else, I mean, it's going to do exactly what you tell it to do, right? There's a classic programmer joke that, you know, sort of implies that programmers think that same way. And you may not get this yet if you haven't written much code, but it's following sort of programming logic. And it's, you know, a wife tells her husband, hey, on your way home, I'm going to be late at work. On your way home from work, you stop by the grocery store and pick up a gallon of milk. And if they have eggs, get a dozen, right? And she gets home and she's like, all right, opens the fridge. Why do we have 12 dozen gallons of milk? He says, you told me they have eggs, get a dozen, but I just assumed you meant gallon of milk, because that would be like how a program would probably interpret that. So let's do another one, and this one I'm not going to work out. We'll give you guys, I mean, we can give about the same amount of time, but I doubt that people would be able to fully define this. This is actually a problem that they'll do it. I can't remember what university, but they tend to give it as one of their early challenges, which is make a sandwich. So you can split up into groups, and this will pretty much be the end of the material for today. You know, we can talk a little bit about if anyone had any lessons, and maybe I'll show a funny video about instructions that make no sense after this. I'll probably stop the stream before that. But this will be the last thing. So we can do, I don't know, if you want to do just 5 minutes, again, we can do that. And then if people can talk about how hard they found it or how many instructions they have, if you want to number them and think like, how many steps do we have? But 5 minutes okay, or people want 10? 5? All right, let's do 5. And try and come up with the steps to make a sandwich. Peanut butter jelly. All right. It's peanut butter jelly time. You did this with people actually having the stuff to make sandwiches? I'm sure it went quite badly, right? Yeah. Yep. All right. It's pretty obvious people had a harder time, right? There's a lot more steps involved in this. There's a lot of things that we take for granted in this, right? Like, what type of sandwiches did people make here? I had a lot of peanut butter. What? What was that? Cheese and butter. All right. Cheese sandwich, man. It works. I heard a lot of peanut butter jelly, right? That's a good one. It's pretty easy. A mayo sandwich. All right. So, I mean, did anybody feel like they finished their instructions in this time?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
They had a lot of details, but after the timer now, I explained, like, there's so many details that we already left out. Like, they said, for example, pick up the knife with your right hand. Put the bread down like that.
Oh, I pick up the knife by the blade and I cut my hand. Oh!
Spread the peanut butter. How you want to spread it. Like those small details.
Right? And so, I mean, that's part of what I'm doing here is what you guys were working on today was the semantic part of programming, the meaning part. We're used to being able to easily convey a lot of semantics with just a few words. To a computer, it takes a lot of words to convey your meaning, right? And that's the syntax part that we didn't really dive into. But you can see that even by the time you get to something relatively simple to do, like making a sandwich, it's hard to break down all of the semantics for it, right? It's hard to break down all of the meaningful things that you're trying to tell it to do. That's why, once you get past the basics of syntax, which is going to be your first real hurdle for most people, you're going to find that the challenge that you're going to have is going to be more on the semantic side, more on the how do I express what I'm trying to do in a meaningful way in this language, and less on the like, oh, I have to put my adjective at this point and don't have a prepositional phrase type things. So I really encourage, as we were doing here, like always think about breaking stuff down. Always think about what's the smaller step that we can do to work towards solving this problem. Always think about, can I solve this in a simpler way? I thought I heard somebody like come up with like a simpler solution where they were along the lines of like, oh, I'm just going to use one of those pre-bottled like peanut butter and jelly already in something. Like, aha! That's a little bit like using somebody's existing code like, oh, I don't have to solve this. Somebody else gave me a solution. Why should I do the same thing that they already have done, right? But yeah, I mean, that this will probably be, if you stick with programming, if you get past the syntax, learning how to break your thinking down in this way is going to be the long-term challenge of programming, which I think is the fun part, right? Dealing with syntax is never that fun. It's just like, oh, this is frustrating. Why isn't it working? I forgot a parenthesis. I'm so annoyed. Trying to express your thoughts in code, that's fun. Like, that's a fun challenge. That's trying to convert it into something that makes sense and has meaning is just, I don't know, it's an exciting thing to do. So even if you are stuck on the syntax early on, realize that this is sort of the goal, is being able to solve, these larger problems, being able to express yourself and solve these things in code. Yes?
Can I just add to that? So, like, I think a lot of things that you guys will be learning in the early parts of this class will seem really tedious and silly maybe at first if you're not familiar with programming at all. It's kind of like a karate kid. You guys seen that movie? Or I'm like, wait. Okay, so like how Mr. Miyagi, like, he teaches Daniel how to do karate by doing these, like, really stupid chores, like painting the fence and washing the car and all that. And Daniel's always, like, he's frustrated, like, why is he doing this? So like you probably, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is like really basic, and it might not make sense at first, but eventually you get to the point where you're doing really cool stuff, like trying to express your thoughts in code, but you just have to kind of get the basics down, so that you can do the cool stuff.
I like that. I haven't thought of that analogy. That's good. Yeah. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think that's purely, and it's like muscle memory. So the more you can just practice, I mean, it's just like learning other habits. So it doesn't, like, this kind of stuff doesn't come naturally together. But for me, it's like I can really kind of think that way, and like even like I'm thinking about how computers organize, because I work best with like only certain ways.
So next class, we'll start diving into some JavaScript basics. For the people who are familiar with programming at all, we'll talk about, I don't know if we'll cover all the types, but we'll cover some of the types of JavaScript. We'll cover expressions and statements and how to put some stuff together. We'll probably get to variables, and I'm guessing somewhere around there will be where we'll stop. When I say types, I don't mean all of the different data structures. I just mean the very basic types, because then we'll start building on with some of the more complex stuff after that. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna end the video now.